You know, I read a book called The Invention of Wings. Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd. It was a very meaningful book to me. It's about these two women called the Grimke sisters who actually lived. They were born into a slave-owning family in Charleston, South Carolina. And they were converted to the abolitionist cause by the Quakers, and then they became leading abolitionists and feminists. And what the book was, the insight that I got from it was the process, the psychological and emotional and moral and spiritual journey that someone would take, and there were many, who were born into slave-owning families and then realized where they were, and realized what their family was about, and realized what their city was about. I remember I was at a slum in Kenya, and I was watching a young man. It's one of the biggest slums in the world called Kibera. And I was wondering, I was looking at this young man. He was looking down at this creek, but really the creek is just sewage. And I was looking at these children, and I was looking at these teenagers, and I was wondering, I wonder at what age they really realize where they are. And so reading this book, Invention of Wings, made me think about the difference between being anti-slavery and being an abolitionist. And there were many people who were anti-slavery, and many people, they lived in places like Massachusetts, and they didn't live in slave-owning states. And they would say terrible things about slavery, and they would say that slavery was horrible and sinful, and they couldn't imagine how people could be slave owners, and they would never do it. But that sentiment, however noble, would not have moved the needle for one enslaved person. But some people crossed the bridge. They crossed that psychological and emotional and moral bridge. They crossed that bridge from, I don't agree with it, to, oh, not on my watch. That's the abolition. And it's not an accident that the abolitionist movement arose from the early evangelicals and Quakers. Any more than it's an accident that so many of the leaders of the women's suffragette movement were Quakers. Any more than it's an accident that the civil rights movement was led by a Baptist preacher and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It has always been throughout our history, out of religious and spiritual circles, that people's movements have arisen by which groups of people said, enough is enough.